Milos Forman directed one of the greatest movies of all time. No, it's not Amadeus, even though I would say that about Amadeus. He made this movie about 8 years before that. It's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I absolutely love this movie. I could watch it every couple of months. One, it's really fun and funny, but it's only that much for a while, and it's poignant, interesting, satirical. It's got all kinds of aspects of reality in it. You could look at this from different political frames. There's obviously a psychological frame, historical, because, you know, the Jack Nicholson character McMurphy is a Korean War vet. You can look at the influence, Ken Kesey's novel. There is no end to thinking about this movie. It's not just about a guy going into a psych ward and dealing with, you know, a number of mental patients and the nurse. There are so many other things going on in this movie. In fact, the movie opens like a Western, and the first shot of this is in the mountains, or it looks like it at least. And of course, we have the Indian chief, who becomes very important as a character in this, and it's sort of kind of a Western. I think we're near the white man and the Indian chief, or the crazy white man, the rebel, the outlaw figure, who's McMurphy, played greatly by Nicholson, and the chief, or sort of outlaw figures, or contained within an institution, and a mental institution at that is a lot like a prison, or even like a school system. Now, before I get into analyzing the movie, I want to say a little bit about the acting in this, which is incredible. Jack Nicholson is fantastic in this. I love him in this. He did great in The Last Detail, and a bunch of Five Easy Pieces, a lot of other early 70s movies. He kind of comes into his own in a lot of ways here. But even as great as he is here, he is not outshining everybody. This movie probably jump-started the careers of, you know, Brad Dourif, Christopher Lloyd, Danny DeVito, for example. Lots of great character actor performances in this. In fact, there is no duddy one in here. They're all fantastic. And then, of course, we have Louise Fletcher, who won an Academy Award as Nurse Ratchet, a very famous performance. And so this movie has a mix of different things. It's this great superstar actor with character actors who are doing great. And then this woman, Louise Fletcher, who, to me, is a different kind of acting to me. It feels like she just was a nurse in a mental institution and walked onto the set. I get the vibe that this is almost as naturalistic a performance as possible, which is the rarest of them all. And it's not that, you know, the superstar actor Jack Nicholson is worse than her. I think these are two different kinds of things, where this is really alluring, a movie kind of star performance by Nicholson, but then her performance is so naturalistic. And yet, here's where we get into the analysis. While she is a fully fledged human being who needs to keep this psych ward or mental institution under control, she's a woman who has power over men who could be violent, and she's also, you know, trying to order these guys who are actually crazy in a lot of different ways. But this performance, to me, is modeled on a lot of Kubrickian stuff, and in particular, HAL 9000.
You think we might ease it down a little bit so maybe the boys didn't have to shout? Huh?
What you probably don't realize is that we have a lot of old men on this ward who couldn't hear the music if we turned it lower. Those are very challenging observations you made, Randall. I'm sure some of the men would like to comment.
So many of the ways she says her lines are like HAL 9000. That cold, calm sort of voice that is the voice of reason, but it's also the voice of authority, and authority with power behind it. And you get that feel with Nurse Ratchet throughout the entire movie, which then is exercised on McMurphy later horrifically in this movie. Now, if Nurse Ratchet is kind of sort of a Hal figure, you know, this movie is Kubrickian in a way. Clockwork Orange comes up for me as, you know, these sort of deviants put into a mental institution, at least the McMurphy character. But then the institution may be worse, and a heck of a lot worse, than the deviant or rebel figure himself. Now, actually, I view this movie in a lot of ways. One, it's a good old classic American rebel story, where a guy coming into a kingdom, as it were, the mental institution, tries to stir things up. McMurphy is a dynamo coming into a world of stasis. He's going to change it all up, and that theme of change, which change is awful for Nurse Ratchet, comes up all the time.
Well, Mr. McMurphy, what you're asking is that we change a very carefully worked out schedule.
Well, change never hurt, huh?
Change is in part political. Here you have him stirring up the men who are voting in order to get the World Series on TV. They're trying to get a vote, but Nurse Ratchet controls the votes, and yet McMurphy versus Nurse Ratchet becomes a political dynamic, whereas if the men all vote with McMurphy, they might change the institution and lessen Nurse Ratchet's power. A little bit of commentary on democracy and fiefdoms and kingdoms and all kinds of things, but it's pretty generic, and so you can look at this as how you wish. But again, McMurphy is a rebel figure, American rebel figure, filthy mouth, and having a good old whopping good time, and then Nurse Ratchet is taking control of him, and it's hard for me to say I like one versus the other. I can see Nurse Ratchet's point of view quite well. If you've ever been into school, for example, and you try to keep order, even in a college, it can be difficult, like, classroom management. And so Nurse Ratchet, I kind of sympathize with her a bit, because if I were her, what would I do? But she's part of a system or systemic institutional thing, which is in a way controlling and in a way negatively formative, I think. I don't think McMurphy is a great man. After all, what's he introducing in the psych ward? Hedonism, all kinds of deviant things. Not all that bad, but somewhat. And yet Nurse Ratchet, what is she doing to everybody else? And what happens to McMurphy in the end is despicable in a Clockwork Orange kind of sense. In that sense, I find this movie to be part of the 60s, 70s trend of humanism, literary humanism, where these down-and-out characters who wouldn't normally star in a movie or wouldn't be the feature of a movie. Here, the mental institution, patients, men with a number of psychological disorders who you think are weird, crazy, kooky, become more fully fledged humans in this movie, and that's thanks to McMurphy's change. Obviously, he's bringing that out of the men in some way, shape, or form. This is not unlike Dog Day Afternoon, which comes out the same year, in which a transsexual man is, made into a human being, and whether you agree with whatever is going on in that movie or this movie or not, you at least understand and try to empathize with them as human beings from their point of view, and then you may even take the Nurse Ratchet stance. But I think overall, that what this movie trying to do is not trying to glamorize and make fun of psych ward patients. It's trying to give them a human dimension in a 1970s way, and whether that matches our modern standards or not is up to you to decide. Talking about the political aspect, psychological aspect, all kinds of other things, there's an astonishing moment in the middle of the movie where McMurphy, he is astonished too, along with me, that all or many of the men are voluntarily in this institution. It certainly looks like they're on lockdown, they can't get out, and actually they can't. But yet they could just get up and walk out of this place, which they're controlled, given drugs, they're warped in a number of ways, they're controlled, they feel like slaves in a way, and yet maybe they need to be just for their own mental health, I don't know. But McMurphy is astonished that they're all volunteering to be in here.
I'm voluntary here, see, I'm not committed. I don't have to stay here. I mean, I can go home anytime I want.
You can go home anytime you want.
As a matter of fact, there are very few men here who are committed.
While he himself is in because he's a criminal trying to escape, I think, the legal system and playing up his so-called crazy vibes. And there are a number of wonderful scenes with him and a doctor who's evaluating him, a real-life doctor who's evaluating him. Nicholson and this doctor are wonderful together. McMurphy is faking it, and probably, but yeah, he's a Korean War vet, so maybe not. Maybe there is a little bit of trauma there, and yet, some of these men are not as messed up as they seem to be. So why are they in this mental institution? Why are they subject to this very silly, I think, insane group therapy session, which one of their sex lives is being talked about? In a way, we don't know, but the hint is with the Dourif character, Billy, who has a bad family life, and who knows how bad these men's family lives are, or ordinary lives. Why else are they escaping into this mental institution that it's giving them what they want? It's kind of like a reservation, a welfare place, where they are given everything they need. They don't have to produce anything. And, they may have some attraction to that. But yet, I would have no doubt some of them really do have disorders. The plot of this movie is a very warped Pixar movie. Now, of course, it's the opposite. The influence is opposite. I think this movie influences The Shining and a number of other movies later on. But you think about WALL-E, that psych ward moment where the WALL-E walks into has to go into the crazy robot psych ward and then bust them all out. Well, guess what? That's an homage, allusion to this very movie. And this kind of movie where everything is orderly, they have their own day-to-day affairs that are ordered, and yet here comes the dynamo, the McMurphy character, into the scene to mix things up, change things up, blow things up, take the men out of the institution, and nearly send it into chaos. That sort of thing. What is this movie going to be then? It's a warped, demented sort of Pixar movie is one way to look at it. And then the use of drugs, the use of different kinds of therapies. Obviously, this movie is set back in the 1960s, about 10, 15 years before this movie comes out, making a comment on earlier things that happened in the 20th century, but also on the war. Here, the Vietnam War comes into play, for example. The control of the government or mental or state institutions come in. And then, of course, everyone is being controlled. And this liberal idea of everyone being controlled and enslaved Obviously, as I said, a Clockwork Orange thing, and then here it is in this movie with Nurse Ratchet, this controlling, dominating, autocratic, technological element, medical element, which McMurphy is rebelling against. Now, when you see it all in that way, let's go back to the comment that this is a Western and what happens to the Indian chief and what happens in the end of this movie. If you think about what's going on there, what he represents, the Indian, the native, the original American, you know, the person outside the system, who's in the system, and all kinds of other things like that. What is this movie about? There you go. Now you can run with an analysis of political, socio-political, economic. Oh my goodness, there's no end to the ways you can look at this movie, even though I really mean this. This is a very funny movie, at least in the first half. I laugh a lot, and just for the sake of enjoyment, I think this movie is delightful. This is one of the movies where I think the movie is better than the book. It's partly because of the performances, but overall, I enjoy the heck out of this movie. As you can tell, I could talk about it for hours, but let's just end the video here. What do you all think of this video, and particularly this movie? What do you bring to this video? Your thoughts, your ideas, let us know in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel for more great content. Thank you. Have a great day. This video is dedicated to Hippolito Pichardo, a great supporter of this channel, Discord user, moderator. Thank you very much for your support.